quorum. We are, my understanding is that we're not streaming live, but I do see the record button that I presume Rebecca has pressed, so we're making a recording of the meeting that will be posted subsequently. As we do with our regular meetings, I'll ask folks to raise questions by raising a hand or putting a note in the chat. And my hope is that we can wrap up tonight by 8:30. Why don't we go ahead and get started? The first item on the agenda is an update on fiscal year closing activities for FY20.
Alrighty, thank you, Mike. Good evening, folks. And first of all, thank you all for your flexibility with rescheduling this week's meeting from last Monday to this evening. You should all see in front of you, this is a document that was prepared by the auditors, Melanson CPAs, as part of the FY20 audit. Though there's still a great deal of work to be done with the audit. In speaking with the lead manager, I'd asked that they fine-tune the wrap up the final numbers for FY20. So this is their document, and this gives you a pretty brief summation of where we ended up in FY20. Just gonna bring your attention down here to this figure here, approximately $107,000, 106,996. That was the ending balance in the general fund per their analysis. I had projected an ending balance of 105,400. So there's a variance of just under $1,600, $1,596. I think I was pretty darn close, pretty spot on in terms of estimating where we would land at the end of FY20. Just a couple of numbers here to bring to your attention. The 150,000 here, this is the transfer out of the general fund into the transportation stabilization account. And again, as we speak about this when I get into FY21 and transportation, but the goal this year as well is to transfer a sum of money in the springtime into that same account. And again, what the value is to be determined. On the revenue side, this one particular figure here, this is an adjustment that the auditors had to make relative to our MTRS payments, and that adjustment is approximately $9.2 million. We don't budget for this, but they need to make that adjustment per GASB 24. And then on the expense side, again, it's the same value, almost $9.2 million. And again, these are the percentages, and hopefully you can see my note in there. But Melanson uses a percentage that they receive from MTRS. And that percentage is driven by the value of Wachusett's deposit or payment to the MTRS. So it's a fluid number every year, and again, that's a figure that they populate, and again from the MTRS. Over here on, and we can see this column here, the current year encumbrance, that's the carry forward, approximately 1.6 million. And then here, this is the 57,000 change is the carry forward from the previous year. So at the end of the day, and as I wrote in my executive summary, in terms of the FY20 budget, our revenues were about $400,000 under budget, and our expenditures were about $500,000 under budget as well. And as we discussed last year, to the main challenges in 20 on the revenue side were Medicaid and miscellaneous revenue. So that's a quick summation. And again, the bottom line is that we ended to the good, 106,996,000. And again, I was projecting 105,400, so variance of just under $1,600. I was pretty happy about that. That's for sure. Happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
Great. Anyone have any questions related to fiscal year 20 close? So now I have just one quickly, just to clarify. So in your column H on your spreadsheet, CY ENC, this 1.6 million, is that, did I hear you say that's the value of the carry forward from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 21?
Yes, it is. And the big number in there obviously is transportation.
So when you say the big number, this is the other school services, the 1.44 or 1.45 million?
Yeah, 1.44.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
I guess I'm a little confused. Didn't we say that we had, so if we net that out, then we're at about $100,000 in the carry forward, right? Or no, I guess about 150,000. But didn't we say that we had exclusive of transportation something like 1.1 million in revolving accounts that we're carrying forward? Or maybe I'm not understanding that.
So this is only the general fund that I'm referring to here. This does not include the revolving funds.
I see. Okay.
This snapshot is just the operating budget.
Okay. Any other questions besides mine on fiscal year 20? Hearing none, let's move on to our status of fiscal year 21.
All righty, just going to scroll down here. We can all see that. So we'll start on the revenue side for FY21, and just a couple points relative to the state budget. As I wrote back on October 14th, the state released revised cherry sheets. Points of interest. Number one, the Chapter 70 is approximately $408,000 less than what we had budgeted. And the reason for that reduction is that the state has backed out the implementation of the Student Opportunity Act for FY21. Also, not listed here yet, but I'll speak in a second, is in circuit breaker. As part of the SOA, they were looking to also reimburse phasing in a portion of special ed transportation circuit breaker. That also has been nixed relative to FY21. On the revised cherry sheets that were released back in October, again, the figure posted there for regional transportation is the same figure that was posted on the governor's budget back in January of 2020, approximately 2.4 million. That is not a very definitive figure. And as I have reported in a previous meeting, Jay Sullivan, the DESE, had asked SBAs back in the summertime to amend their FY19 end of the year reports and to report the actuals only, so he could recalculate regional transportation. So those figures are not known yet. So I just want to point out that the revised cherry sheets has the same number in October as was the governor's number back in January. On the revised cherry sheets, we picked up almost $60,000, $59,755 in charter school reimbursement. Relative to school choice, again, on the revised cherry sheets, the figure that is listed there is approximately $373,000. We were estimating this year in FY21 that our school choice would be 300,000. So we picked up 73,000 and change. Again, this is a fluid figure, and by that I mean it will be adjusted during the year as we make adjustments in our reporting to school choice. And as I had reported earlier, we did bring forward from FY20 into FY21 approximately 372,000 in school choice. On October 16th, the DESE did release circuit breaker figures for FY21, and our estimated reimbursement this year, as of now, is just under 3.1 million, $3,076,591. And that reimbursement is based upon 70% reimbursement. And again, typically these numbers hold true throughout the year. If anything, there's an adjustment in the fourth quarter, and that adjustment is a slight adjustment up, if you will, in terms of the final payment. So I would argue that we can certainly bank, if you will, that almost 3.1 million in FY21. And as I said a moment ago, that figure does not include the phase-in of special ed transportation. Again, it was supposed to be 25% in 21, and then 50% 22, and thereafter. And at this point in time, the phase-in, the SOA phase-in relative to special ed transportation for circuit breaker will hopefully happen in FY22. With this figure of 3 million plus, again, we were estimating approximately 2.7 million. So we picked up approximately $300,000 in FY21. And again, fluid figure given placements throughout the year in out-of-district placements. In terms, so I'm going to just scroll down real quick to the attachments. Make it a little bit larger for people. So this is a revenue budget report, and again, all the towns approved our budget as presented. As you can see, Chapter 70 we have received to date 7.3 million. We have received to date just under $76,000. In Medicaid, we received to date a little bit over $16,000 in charter reimbursement. We bumped up interest this year, and when I ran this report a couple of weeks ago, we had received just a little bit over $3,000, and in miscellaneous income, $5,400. In terms of projecting out, again, as I noted a moment ago, Chapter 70 is $408,841 below what we had budgeted. The charter reimbursement, again, is $59,755 above the budget. In terms of Medicaid, again, it's still too early to tell. Again, 76,000 is in the bank, and we're estimating between the payments in December, the payments in March, and the final big payment in June, which is for the cost report, 374,000. We'll have a much better sense on the Medicaid revenues for the year after holidays, probably early on in the new calendar year. In the notes, as I stated a moment ago, again, Chapter 70 is per the recent cherry sheets released a couple of weeks ago. Regional transportation still remains an unknown. And again, working on my end of the year report, really is no guidance as to what the reimbursement might be in terms of the percent. And again, the third note, again, as I stated a moment ago, is relative to the state budget figures and the additional cash and the charter reimbursement. Be happy to answer any questions on the revenue side. And I'm sorry, and before we go on to the expenditures. Again, in terms of FY 20 to 21 carry forwards, as I had reported previously, for circuit breaker, we brought forward $1,050,000 into 21. That money must be expended, and for all intents and purposes has been expended in FY 21. When you bring forward circuit breaker, you have 1 year to expend those dollars. The goal this year again, especially as we move forward into the year, is to work to bring forward a sum of money, and I'll have a better sense when I reconnect with Director Smith in a week or so to look at where we are with tuitions and to make the adjustments between circuit breaker, the general fund, and the 240 grant. And as I said also a moment ago, we brought forward in school choice approximately 372,000, and we're adding to that balance. I checked the balance earlier today, and we were just under $500,000, approximately 485,000 and change as an available balance in school choice. And again, the plan is to bring forward again, if possible, a sum of money of this year's receipts into FY 22. Be happy to answer any questions before we get into the expense side.
I have a quick question.
Please.
And I probably missed this because I was a couple minutes late, so I apologize. Do you have it? I just didn't know if there's information we don't have yet. Do we have any sense of when the state might know transportation numbers? I know they're working on their budget, but I didn't know the latest. I know they had a hearing last week, but do we know any update in the past few days about their timeline? I know originally they were trying to get it done in November, but obviously November is here and it's no closer to being done than it was like a month ago. So
no, Malaya, no further information. As a matter of fact, I had reached out to the DESI when I was working on my end of the year. I had a question about that relative to Schedule 7. Do I report the actuals or do I report the actuals plus what's been encumbered? And I still don't have an answer from them, and they're my first call tomorrow morning, so that's still up in the air. I should also point out, since you brought that up, just a reminder to the group that last year the DESI was supposed to make the second adjustment from a couple years ago, approximately 133,000. So when they do finally resolve what regional transportation will be for 21, again, they're going to need to make that second and final adjustment from a couple years ago, and that'll reduce our reimbursement.
Any other questions on the revenue side for fiscal year 21? So Dan, I had one. If you can go back to the sheet that we were looking at before. So I guess the headline to me on the revenue side, I mean, obviously we know that the towns passed our budget. There was about 1.8 million question mark as to whether we were going to have level funded versus what we had budgeted. The takeaway that I'm getting from this is that except for transportation, which we know is going to be lower because we had lower expenses, which is what they've asked us to revise, except for transportation, it sounds like the other aspects of this are basically netting out to what we've budgeted from a state revenue perspective. Is that a fair observation or assessment?
Well, there's two lines, Mike, on the state side that we're probably going to see a reduction. Obviously, number one is transportation, and again, that's an unknown. The second is our Chapter 78, as I have it here, almost $409,000, but below our budget there. and we knew, I think I had previously reported it was 411,000, but that was before the revised figures came out on October 14th. So I think we can probably go to the bank, if you will, my term, with the 48841 as being the reduction. I don't foresee Chapter 70 changing from what is posted here. I could be wrong, but because the state budget has not been finalized yet. Sorry, are we still here? Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry about that. I had an update show up out of nowhere, a Java update. On the charter reimbursement, I feel confident that we can go to the bank with that figure as well. So right now,
Again, that figure was the over 300,000 above what we were budgeting.
I'm sorry, Mike.
There was another figure that you were showing us earlier that was coming in at I think a little over 3 million, where we had budgeted 2.7.
Circuit breaker.
Okay, circuit breaker. That's it. Yep.
Circuit breaker. So again, this report here, this report that I have in front of you, is a general fund. Let me make a recommendation. Let me prepare a separate listing of revolving funds. Actually, we have a separate listing of revolving funds, which I don't have in tonight's report, but I'm happy to include that. I can get that out to you this week.
I guess the picture that I'm trying to get to is probably the same picture that we've been trying to get to for the last few months, and that is really kind of a snapshot of what we have originally budgeted versus how we believe all the numbers are coming in now. And at least from a state revenue perspective, as you've gone through the list with us, if I think about the different components of the state revenue, in one area we're short by about 400,000. In another area we're to the good of north of 300,000, and then in another area about 60,000. So again, understanding the transportation, we don't know. We know that number is going to be lower. In the absence of having something that tells me what we should be considering for an estimated revised budget, I'm trying to figure this out on the fly, right? And so, to me, I'm netting that out as, except for transportation, we're pretty darn close to what we've budgeted. And I guess I'm trying to understand: am I thinking about this the right way, or am I completely off here?
Nope, you're not completely off. I mean, this report here and my projections out show us to be off by about 349,000 and change. Again, excluding, and the key word is excluding, regional transportation.
Right, but we also have 300 plus greater than expected reimbursement for circuit breaker.
That is correct. Right, we were.
When I take that into account, then I'm netting out to pretty close to zero, except for transportation. Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any questions on the revenue side? Well, let me go ahead and move on.
Alrighty. So you have in front of you, this is the expense budget report, and I'm going to jump down here to the next screen so you can see this a little bit bigger. It's the same information, but what I did was I did some projections here, and the column that's labeled COVID cuts, these were adjustments that we had made early on in the budget process. I didn't reduce those figures. For example, the 2,281,166, that figure there is in that $4.2 million. That's why that balance is what it is. if you look to the right, there are some adjustments, and again, on the payroll side, I'm looking at adjustments of approximately $2.4 million, and those are estimates, which leaves us with a projected balance, and it's still early in the year, of 1.8 million. So what still needs to be done here? A couple things, as I noted in my report. Number one, keyword may be the need for additional hires to replace staff who may be going out on leave or who are out on leave. These would be teachers. I've allocated a sum of money, and again, that's not definitive yet, but we've allocated a sum of money to potentially address that need. Number two, day-to-day subs. Again, we can't encumber day-to-day subs, but I'm estimating, based upon my data from the end of the year report, $500,000. Number three, there are still a number of vacancies that HR has reported and has posted, I should say, and there's a value there of $400,000. And number four, there are still a number of adjustments for various groups, from various memberships to unrepresented groups where there haven't been any adjustments yet for this fiscal year, and that's almost $500,000. When you factor all that in, it gets us down to the available budget of 1.8, and that's a very fluid figure. Again, the day-to-day sub number could change very easily. The hires, maybe we don't need to hire as many people. Maybe we need to hire more people, and that's a fluid number. So, and again, that's a snapshot in time as of the end of October when I prepared this report. Under benefits and insurance, again, the big figure in there is the unemployment. We did receive a couple weeks ago our second invoice for FY21, and this invoice was retroactive back to last March. We hadn't received an invoice since that time. As you may have seen in the recent warrant, that invoice was just shy of $270,000, $270,000, and that was a cumulative figure going back to last March. We paid approximately $250,000 of that invoice out of our school reopening grant, and then the balance out of the general fund. Again, we're going to need to watch the unemployment figure very, very closely as we move forward. The $500,000 that you see there in the adjustments is we have yet to make any adjustments between the general fund and school choice. We did budget for school choice in FY21 to offset the insurances, and again, we'll need to do that. And once we do that, again, we're projecting a balance in that appropriation. Probably won't make that adjustment immediately. We'll wait to get a few more invoices on unemployment to see if that levels off, and hopefully it will level off in the next month or two. Instructional support. Again, there's a balance of $1.8 million, but as I had stated in my narrative, there are two big numbers within that one number there. The first are textbooks, almost $800,000 that is yet to be encumbered. And then the second figure, still fairly large figure, is special education contracted services, $475,000 and change. That's not encumbered yet. That is a fluid figure, and as we progress through the year, obviously we'll be looking to reduce that figure and allocate where necessary. And then the other figure that's rolled into that 1.8 is we have a contracted services for regular ed, and there's an unencumbered balance there of just under 103,000, 102,796 and 31 cents. Operations and maintenance. The 720,000 that you see there is probably a little bit misleading, because there's still work to be done in the buildings relative to HVAC work, and there are a number of other projects that are going on. So and plus we haven't really hit the winter months yet in terms of the heating and the natural gas. So though we did bring forward 80,000 and change, as noted there, this is probably the year that we have 20 feet of snow out there with bitter cold temperatures. Let's not hope not, but so that figure will most likely be reduced as we move forward. Pupil services, again, 24,788. We just need to make some additional encumbrances relative to nursing supplies and materials. Special ed tuitions, again, the adjustment that you see there is to make an adjustment between the general fund and circuit breaker. I talked about this in my report. As of now, relative to tuitions, between the all funding sources, where we're looking at our estimated revenues. Say that 10 times fast. Our estimated revenues this year is just under 8.4 million, and that's broken out over several accounts, several funds. Number one, in the general fund, 2.7 million. As I stated earlier, we budgeted 1.5 million. And our confirmed circuit breaker figure for this year is a little bit over $3 million. And so for those three funds, when you factor in the carry forward in this year's circuit breaker, gets us to the almost 8.4 million in revenues. On the expenditure side, for tuitions, again, these are all tuitions. As of 2 weeks ago, we were estimating expenditures of almost 6.4 million, 6,385,119. That figure has changed in the past couple of days. There have been several additional tuitions brought forward, so that number is going to be reduced. So monitor very closely with Director Smith and her staff in special education. Other operating cost, this is a cherry sheet figure, school choice out, and charter school assessments. Again, we're looking at a shortfall there of 155,000. But that's a fluid number, and when the state's budget is finalized, we hope to have a definitive figure for that right there. Transportation. I'm going to pass over that for a second. I'll come back to that in a second. I'll come back to that in a second. I'll leave that for last. And in terms of debt service, we have fully encumbered all of our debt service for the year. Alrighty, transportation. Right now, again, our budget this year was $7.2 million, and the adjustment that you see there of $300,000, that's the result of some activity from a week ago, and we had to increase the number of vehicles for our sped in district transportation. We went from 29 to 35. In terms of transportation this year, projecting out in terms of home to school, and these are very, very tentative figures, and they are subject to change even as I speak. Home to school, looking at unofficially 1.4 million. In terms of sped in district, 177,000 short. and sped out of district 56,000. So the estimated balance would be 1.3 million. However, as I said a moment ago, when we were fine tuning transportation for sped in districts, and given their restrictions with vehicles, we had to add several additional vehicles for in district transportation. We are in the process of finalizing the routes and the vehicles for home to school. As of now, there doesn't appear to be the need to add additional equipment, given the ridership figures that we had about a week or so ago. But again, those have not been finalized yet. I had mentioned this at our previous meeting. There are still some additional cost that all providers, sped transportation providers, are looking to pass on to us, and we just haven't finalized those figures yet. Vanpool, for example, is looking to pass on some additional cleaning costs as part of their contract. And again, that contract for FY21 has yet to be resolved. I've got some questions that we need to get answered. And in terms of the home to school, again, there are cleaning costs that have been presented, but there's been no further discussion if those will be passed on to us or not. I know that this was a question asked at our previous meeting, and these are very preliminary projections in terms of where we might land in FY21 with transportation. The other issue too is the savings in transportation is based upon the fact that we're not paying for the days that the buses aren't running, and which includes Wednesdays as well. And this kind of brings us back to last spring, but the provider has an expectation that there is some compensation for those days. It's a whole separate discussion that we haven't even gone down that road yet this year. But that's why that balance is so large in the home to school, is because we've backed out those those days that the buses are not running. Be happy to answer any questions on this, please.
Any questions for Dan on fiscal year 21?
I heard a beep. I think someone had a hand raised. No?
I do. I have a quick, well, it's more just because I'm visual. At some point, would you be able to send the transportation adjustments you just went over in a document? Because I know you mentioned several figures increased in different, all of the transportation amounts. And I know the final number is what's here, but it would be helpful, because I can't write that fast, just to know kind of which ones went up and by how much, because I'm sure we'll be hearing about these as you keep negotiating the contracts with them.
Yes, and again, I just want to stress that these are fluid figures for sure.
Yeah, I just, unless it's in here, but I don't remember seeing that in the packet, that the out of district went up this much, and the different amounts that you just went over.
Sure
it would just be helpful to have that in a summary somewhere. Thank you.
Okay, I have Ken next.
Perhaps a corollary to Malaya, the costs that we're incurring potentially from providers and our budget, and I guess if we could get some sense of a breakdown of what of those things are actually reimbursable or not. Like, you know, we've got a budget, we're getting expenses. I know as the word of the night is fluid, but you know, as our expenses change, our anticipated reimbursement is also going to change, right? So I guess I just don't completely understand how to make sense of that. And maybe there's no easy way until the bills actually come in and we can see what's reimbursable, right? But like if they charge, but as a for instance, if they're going to charge us money for cleaning, is that something that can go to regional transportation, or is it not? Since it's not actually putting a kid on a bus and the wheels on the bus go round and round, it's a different expense, right?
So Ken, a couple things. Number one, the SOA hopefully will be implemented next year, and with that will be sped transportation and circuit breaker. The guidance that we received this past year, that it would just be the vehicles themselves and not any other related costs, for example, cleaning. Secondly, in terms of the home to school, it's I would probably categorize the cleaning expenditures in a separate account, so as to not to confuse that with the day-to-day cost of transportation. But again, those figures are very much up in the air. There is a schedule that Vanpool has sent to districts relative to cleaning cost. I haven't agreed to it yet. We haven't agreed on the contract because of how they've recalculated some of the existing routes. So that's still in process for sure. But I understand. I hear your point.
And just to follow up, and I don't mean to, like, this is probably something you just can't know, but I just have this pit in my stomach, which I'm sure you share to some degree, between last year's expenses not being very clear, this year being fluid, that there being some point in our budget cycle where DESE says your reimbursement is this, and it's a heck of a lot less than we anticipated, because however they do the math on what we spent last year, when we're paying them, what we're not paying them, that it could just be less than one might anticipate. And I know you're on top of it. I know it's fluid. I just wanted my unease on the table, so it wasn't just mine alone at the moment.
I understand. Thank you.
All right, I have Carl next.
So my question is, and I wonder if you'd be able to kind of talk through for a little bit about our food services. And I know it's not explicitly listed here because it's one of the, basically has to pay for itself. And I guess my question gets at, so one, with it being now the USDA program being expanded and it being free lunch for every student in the district who wants it, I've anecdotally heard that the more students that we have participate in our school lunch program, financially it's better, but that's something I don't have a good understanding of. And I wondered if you could take a couple minutes just to kind of talk through how the finances of our school lunch program works.
So I'd be happy to do that. That's it's in my report here. It's at the end. That's under the deliverables. That's the final attachment. So if you'd like, could we hold on to that until I get to that point here this evening?
Oh, perfect.
You know what, Dan, I think that the deliverables are probably best discussed in context as opposed to a separate item. So I would be fine if you wanted to, talk about that here.
Can I ask, Mike, my question was a follow-up on transportation. Should I hold on to that, or should I come?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead with your follow-up on transportation while we're teeing up the question about.
It was really just as we're thinking about other information. When you mentioned that they have a schedule of additional charges for us, I wonder if those are, spelled out additional charges, or if it's something that they are asking to adjust their rates based on, because if they folded into their rates per vehicle perhaps and change that, then we would be able to possibly get reimbursed for that, versus if they label it as extra expenses. So I didn't know if that is a factor in how we ultimately restructure things with them.
Yeah,
so just raising that.
No, it's a good point, Malaya, and again, right now, I'm looking at that as being separate
Okay.
from any daily rate.
Okay. I don't know what's better. I was just raising the question that theoretically, if if there is some reimbursement and it was folded into just the cost of their business for the year, then we may be able to get some of that back. But okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
I guess I have two questions that are related to this. Carl, if you don't mind, they're related to transportation. If you don't mind, take them in front of the food service one before we
Go for it.
Thank you. So similar to Malea's comment, it strikes me that, and I don't know, right? But it strikes me that if we have changed requirements, just like every district in the Commonwealth has changed requirements of their transportation provider, by spacing out and by cleaning and putting on that responsibility, it's reasonable that you would expect that you would have a rate increase for changing those requirements. That to me is part of the business now of transporting students. I guess I would be a bit surprised if the cost of the business of transporting students is going to be dissected in that way. And I guess that however it is that we're tracking it, I hope that we're just making sure that we're not leaving a potential reimbursable or what could be a reimbursable expense on the table, and that we have some clarification or at least some understanding as to why that new expense would be bifurcated and treated differently. The second comment that I had is, I'm still trying to get my head around what I haven't seen in this report yet today is the additional expenses that we've incurred as a result of PPE and all of the additional things that we've needed to do. I think that there was a COVID adjustment column that you showed that was mostly impacting the salary line. But I guess I'd like to understand, at least at a high level, what are we budgeting for expenses, and what have we been able to get reimbursed, and what's the delta?
Alrighty, so bear with me as I kind of scroll up and down here. Just in terms of what have we been reimbursed for, as the committee knows, I submitted back in the summertime an application with FEMA, and I did hear from FEMA, our rep at FEMA recently, and we had put forward a request for approximately 129,000 and change for reimbursement. That is going to be a fairly slow process. They're looking for additional information from us. This information was not part of the original application, but they're looking for several paragraphs at a minimum on how the dollars were expended and why were they expended and so on and so forth. So there's 129,000 that is out there, and again, the premise that all of that gets reimbursed. We're looking at approximately 96,000 and change as possible reimbursement. There is a second application that we will be putting forward, and again, that will reflect some payroll costs, as well as the additional charges that we've incurred, charges that were not built into any of the grants. As I had stated in a previous report, and it's in this report here, I did create in the general fund a line item for COVID-related expenditures. Let me just scroll down to the deliverables. That line item is QCV 400. In that line item, we have spent to date approximately $532,000, and that includes the year-to-date expenditures as well as the encumbrances and requisitions. These are COVID-related expenditures that were not built into the budget, and we're looking to seek reimbursement through FEMA. Secondly, again, another funding source to address COVID-related cost was the school reopening grant of approximately $1.5 million. This school reopening grant, just a couple of highlights of this grant, where we're using that to, as I said earlier this evening, to pay for unemployment costs at approximately $250,000. There are costs built into this grant to pay for overtime for HVAC work. There are costs built into this grant for PPE supplies, and there's also cost built into this grant for additional curriculum materials. A second grant that was related to address COVID expenditures is the ESSER grant with a value of $176,898. And this grant addresses primarily instructional technology as well as PPE supplies. And then the third grant is the RLTE grant, which is the Remote Learning Technology Essentials grant, with a value of $146,000 and change. And this grant here is used primarily for instructional technology.
Dan, again, I'm just trying to put it together based on your narration. But if I'm envisioning, what are the additional expenses that we've incurred versus what are the grants that we've applied for and expect to come in, it sounds like we're, and I'm not sure if we've experienced or we're planning on $500,000 above what was budgeted, and we have close to $2 million in grants that we anticipate coming in. Am I getting that right?
Yes, and this is the line, and again, this report was run a couple of weeks ago. I should point out, Mike, that though there are $500,000 as of today in this account here, that there are charges that are made to this account that may have been or could have been made to an account in the operations and maintenance appropriation. The reason why we did not charge it off to that appropriation, but rather here, is to facilitate the ease of reporting and to enable us to pull the data rather quickly so that we could submit our application to FEMA. Certainly, there is a goodly amount in here that if we charged off to operations and maintenance, that appropriation would have a significantly less balance in it than if we're charged here.
So, and again, clearly, I'm missing something because I'm assuming that these grants are based on reimbursement.
No, the school reopening grant was based upon the foundation budget of $225 per student.
Okay.
And it was and that grant is retroactive to last March 2nd, I believe it is. And that grant only runs through December 30 of this year. And the same for the other two federal grants as well. So though we're looking at almost $2 million, those dollars need to be expended. And for all intents and purposes, aside from the school reopening grant, those other grants have pretty much been depleted. It's the school reopening grant where there's still expenditures to be made, and they will be made prior to December 30 of 2020.
So to recap, we have available through grant funding a little south of $2 million. We've experienced about $500,000 of COVID-related expenses to date. Do we know what are we anticipating? What other COVID-related expenses are we anticipating at this point? What do we expect that number to get to? Are we going to move all the way up to 2 million, or are we going to come in somewhere south of that?
So the remaining charges, primarily school reopening grant, are relative to PPE supplies. We're putting through another order in that grant, and I think the PPE supplies that'll be an ongoing expense throughout the year to ensure that our inventory is replenished accordingly. And
How much have we spent in PPE so far?
I'm sorry, Mike.
How much have we spent in PPE so far?
I don't have that figure off the top of my head, but I will get that for you. And it is spread out over several funds between the general fund and the various grants. So I'll get that for you for our next meeting.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure if I'm just not understanding it. Even though I've said it a couple times, you haven't corrected me. So I assume I'm saying it correctly. If we're getting $2 million in COVID-related grant funding, and we're only expecting that it's that we're spending 500,000. I guess I'm wondering if the 500,000 seems light. Are we including things like the additional Chromebook purchases, or I don't know, plexiglass dividers or different things that we've needed to purchase in order to reopen schools?
Yeah, so again, you're looking, I hope you're seeing on your screen here, the line from the budget report. And again, as of ran this report on the 23rd of October. Again, we had spent almost $400,000 and there was no appropriation. As I said a moment ago, for the ease of reporting, these could have been charged under the operations and maintenance, but we'd have to go through it line by line. So we put it here. So there's 400,000.
Question of where, what line we're charging it to. Mine's just a question of additional expenses versus additional revenue. I mean, it's as simple as that, right? I don't mean to confuse it with, where we're tracking it. I'm simply asking the question of what was the additional expense that we incurred and what's the additional revenue that we're getting to offset it. And it sounds like we're getting a lot more revenue than the expense.
So the 2 million, that revenue, those dollars will be expended by this December of 2020. Number one. Then what remains is any additional expenditures beyond December of 2020, in which case that is an unknown, aside from the fact that we will most likely need to continue to replenish our PPE materials. And if we do, again, it'll come out of this line here. I'd have to look at what an average order is. I believe today, for example, if I remember, I put through about almost $70,000 in PPE in a PPE order. How long will that get us through? Again, I have to speak to Deputy Superintendent Berlow there, but again, this is where the activity will be for the year from January through June. And again, we're hopeful that some of this will be reimbursed by FEMA. But I can't predict that because we have nothing yet from them. Again, there is no budget here for these charges.
All right. Why don't we go ahead to, sorry, Carl, it was longer than I thought, your question on food service.
All righty, so hopefully I don't lose this, but if we do, we do. All right, there you go. This was one of the final documents in your packet. This was a report that was generated by Director Barton, and this is through September of 2020. Just a couple of points here. Number one, her ending balance at the end of, I'm sure you can see it there or not, at the end of FY20 was approximately $25,463 and change. In terms of this year, the revenue to date and expenditures to date. Again, because the grab and go was based primarily at the high school, but there were some other buildings as well. The high school is the one location where there has been significant reimbursements, as you can see here, and actually it was the high school at the end of the year, which basically carry forward the balance of school lunch. Right now, through the end of September, there is a negative balance. She's in the hole, approximately 54,159 in change. We are in the process of fine-tuning the revenues and the expenditures. Director Barton has recalled a number of staff who were laid off, and we're also looking to estimate the revenues for the balance of the year based upon the free lunch that was recently approved through the end of June of 21. And one of the adjustments that we will be making in FY21, given the unknowns at this time, is that all health insurance costs that typically are charged back to the school lunch will now be paid out of the general fund in FY21. Number two, we'll be looking to make an adjustment in charging the director's salary out of school lunch back into the general fund in 21. One of the problems that she's experiencing relative to her product is that paper goods are in high demand and in a very, very short supply, for sure. So at this point, there's a shortfall of 54,000 and change. As you know, at the end of the year, this account cannot end up in the negative, and we'll be fine-tuning these expenditures now that her staff will be back on board, and the revenues for our next meeting here.
Carl, did that answer your question? Is Carl there? There you are.
Hello, can you hear me? I'm having all sorts of tech issues tonight.
We can hear you.
Okay, so I guess my question was it looked like the follow-on sheet to that showed revenues of 45,000, and so I kind of trying to parse through what some of these different numbers mean, and then, or even if you could kind of just kind of a high level talk about how, especially how with lunches being free, and the reimbursement from USDA, or kind of how that works, kind of, or at least kind of at a high level, what that looks like budget wise for us.
So this reimbursement here is for the month of September, and this is based upon the grab and go meals that Margaret has been distributing for the past month or so. this figure here is clearly going to change, because as we come back into the buildings in a couple of weeks, there is a cost per meal. I don't have that here in front of me. I apologize. That she will be reimbursing. And speaking with Margaret, though, we plan to lowball those reimbursements until we get into probably January, February, when we have a better sense in terms of what the revenues may be for the balance of the year. On her expenditure side, again, there will be the payroll cost. There won't be the benefits, the insurances, and what have you. But then there is the product as well.
So if I understand the intent of Carl's question, I think what he was getting at, and Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, is does the reimbursement that we're getting from the FDA offset the expenses that we're incurring to be able to produce the lunches?
They do, Mike. What is not known at this time, for example, is we don't have a sense yet, and we'd probably need another month or two in terms of the number of meals that'll be served at Dawson, Mountview, Mayo, Davis Hill, and Naquag. And again, at the end of the day, her account needs to end, to the good. And these figures here, we'll have a better sense probably in December or January to project out for the balance of the year.
Carl, I answer your Okay. Any other questions on where we stand in fiscal year 21?
Mike, can I go back
Sorry,
to the COVID question? I had a question about the COVID situation, the grants and things.
Yeah, well, just 1 second. Carl, did you have a quick follow-up, or I tell you?
No. I'll wait.
I think you did, Mike.
That was kind of at the root of it. I mean, because my question is, I figured that like with our food services, there's got to be some like break even point. So like, for example, if we had one kid across the entire district who wanted a lunch, the USDA would presumably give us like $5 for that one student, which that wouldn't cover the cost to pay for the staff and all of that. And so that's great, kind of like for how many students or how many lunches would we need for like kind of to get to where roughly where that break even point is. That's kind of more along the lines of what I was getting at.
So it sounds like, Dan, you need to come back with us for more information on after you've had some experience or maybe projections on what it's going to cost and how many meals you're planning to serve. I mean, I presume that the people who are in the cafeterias who are getting ready for students' return are going to have some way of planning for the number of lunches they're going to make on day one, given the experience to everyone. But perhaps that's something, Dan, you could take away and update us in the next meeting.
Be happy to.
Thank you. Malia, you had a question on COVID costs?
Well, it was just trying to clarify what you're talking about, so I apologize to go back to that. I think, and I might be misunderstanding this, but as you were talking, it sounded to me like we have more in grants than we have in the COVID expense line at the moment. But my understanding and listening to Dan talk is that the amount in the grants includes anticipated expenses, whereas the amount in the COVID expense line is only things we've already spent. Would that account for the difference, or is there am I completely misunderstanding that?
So the money, Malaya, in the grants, these are known expenditures. These are expenditures that were written into the grant. I have up here in front of you now the school reopening grant, for example. And you can see that there's a line here for 14,290. That's a payroll line. That's the line to pay for the overtime. Down here is the 250 for, I'm sorry, the 250 is actually rolled into this 908. That 908 is a combination of several different items. Here, this is the curriculum technology that I spoke about. Here is more technology, but these are all identified expenditures relative to the grant.
But the other line that you showed us, the COVID, the one that had the arrows on it, was just the COVID
Yes,
expenses.
in the general
That
fund.
is much less than the amount that you have in the grants that we've received. So is that difference because some of it has not been spent yet and those only reflect what we've spent to date?
It's different, Malaya, because the charges to the general fund are not charges that were built into the grant. And number one, and number two, the charges that are in the general fund are charges that exceed, for example, a grant line here. PPE, for example, there's a value in this grant for PPE supplies. PPE is going to be an ongoing need throughout the year. Thus, it was charged off to the general fund.
So are those, okay. So are those amounts in the general fund not included in the grants? Then this is why I'm
Correct.
confused, because we have
They're
over
not.
$2
They're
million in
separate.
grants and
They're separate,
500,000 spent.
They're separate from the grants altogether.
So the 500,000 that we've spent or so is stuff that's not in the grant. It's
That
from
is
the
correct.
general fund.
That is
It's not
correct.
included in the grants at all.
That is
Because I would
correct.
think things like PPE would be included in the grants from all of our previous discussions. So
They are, Malaya. There is a line in this grant for PPE supplies, but the line in the grant, I don't have the exact value because it's rolled into this 908,000 here. But for sake of discussion, I'll say it's 200,000. Don't hold me to that figure, but it's 200,000. Whereas, as you saw in the general fund, there are a number of COVID-related costs, including PPE supplies, that are being charged the general fund because there is no longer any funding within the grants. We have exhausted the funding available in the grants.
Okay. That helps a little. It doesn't, I think it's the general direction. So that's helpful. Thank you. Appreciate
Any other
it.
questions on anything related to fiscal 21 status? I guess I'll just reiterate my longstanding request is as we go through this, in order to have the picture of how has our budget changed from what was originally passed to now? What are the additional revenues? What are the additional expenses that we've incurred? It would be helpful to have a buildup of those things with a schedule that kind of shows us, for example, here are the COVID-related expenses. Here are the grants that are going against those COVID-related expenses. For a state spending perspective, here's what we were budgeting. Here's what we're receiving. But to have a buildup and a picture that shows us those things, I think would be helpful for this committee to understand.
Alrighty. Thank you. We'll get that. Mike, what I'll do is I'm going to prepare a draft document, and I'll run it by you before our next meeting to ensure that it reads as you'd like it to read.
Appreciate it. All right, let's move on to fiscal 22 budget schedule.
So this is a draft of the 22 budget calendar, and again, subject to change. And this here is modeled after the calendar from the previous years. And again, to my knowledge, I've not been in for a little bit over a week. But budget kickoff would have been this week, most likely. You know, given past years, I don't have a date yet on when that'll be. But that'll be with the 5 towns, and then we'll have our kickoff administration with leadership team as well, and we'll set goals for the 22 budget process. In December, we have a lot of meetings with respective principals and directors, and hear from them and discuss their needs. The intent is to get a draft of the budget to finance in early January or thereabouts, to take a first crack at the budget. The governor's budget comes out towards the latter part of January. That, and assuming that that date holds, and we'll have certainly a much better sense where we might be for 22. I mean, we just may have at that point just have received a budget for 21, and we'll be getting a draft of the 22 budget. In February, again, we have various meetings with the respective FinComs from each of the towns. We'll be bringing forward a budget for the committee's review and approval in early March, and latter part of March or early April. The House will come out with the budget, and the Senate will come out with the budget, and then we get into May with the various town meetings. And again, assuming that this schedule adheres to from 2 years ago, as the committee knows, just given the pandemic and the challenges of FY21, many town meetings were pushed off until later in June, or Paxton had theirs, and theirs in August. So tentative schedule, subject to change for sure.
Any questions regarding the budget calendar? The one comment, I guess, two items, Dan, if you wouldn't mind scrolling towards the top of your document, that I would, 2 items that I would request that we add to the calendar. One, you know, we have meetings with principals and directors in December of 2020. Sometime between that happening and a draft budget being submitted to Business and Finance, I think there ought to be a readout of what the outcome of those conversations are, so that we're understanding, you know, what are you hearing in terms of the needs from the building and program level. That's number one. Number two, for a full school committee, I think there ought to be some opportunity for the full school committee to be able to opine on budget priorities for next year prior to the budget being developed. And, you know, there's not a lot of time here between December 2020 and January 2021, but based on our experience now and going through this cycle quite a few times, that second one is always feedback that we get at a full school committee level. And the first is one that I think will help inform this subcommittee in terms of knowing and sharing and hearing and understanding what's being requested for at the building level. Is that something that we can do, Dan and Daryl?
Yep, I can build them in, Mike. I'll work with Daryl probably in December. Actually, probably both of those suggestions there in December of 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I really just want to second that and say that, and this is probably more for Daryl than for Dan, but I think that the district made curricular decisions based on budget this year that never really were discussed at school committee because of the exigency of the situation, be it middle school strings, be it limiting choice for middle school foreign language, et cetera, the things that I think are really curricular and fall within our purview of having discussed. And I get that there was exigency at the time, right, to make those changes, but this is the time where that's just not acceptable, right? Like, I think we have to have a discussion about how the curriculum has changed based on budget. And and where those priorities rest. Not that it's our decision solely, but it should be a conversation that the committee should have with administration and the time frame Mike suggests. So it's not like a, oh, well, we didn't put that in, and oh, we're already going to the towns, and oh, it's an increase in the budget, type of conversation.
Yeah, Ken, if I can just jump in on that. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And again, that's not typically how we would have kind of managed that. Any type of budget season where we're going through and talking about those types of items. So you're right, it did tie back to what was going on at the time. But moving forward, the only other thing we're gonna have to think about is we don't even have a budget yet for FY20, so that's going to throw off the FY21. So it's going to throw off the FY22 process a little bit in terms of the time frame. So again, I've not had a conversation with anyone at the state level around their projections for moving forward into next year's budget, because they're still working on this year's budget. But I do agree that anything that we kind of talk about, we're going to have to, ensure that we're bringing everybody into the fold, because I think this year coming up, and Dan has alluded to it a couple of times, we're trying to hold on to funds this year to help us out for next year. And that's been shared with us on many occasions by DESE. Just kind of I wouldn't say it's a doom and gloom outcome, but it's a reality outcome in terms of the revenues that are coming in or the lack of, and how that's going to play out for budgets next year. So, I'm not sure how much funding we're going to get. And as Dan said, we still have a certain number of items up in the air for this current budget that we're looking at right now.
Any other comments or questions on the budget calendar for fiscal 22?
Yep. My hand raising isn't working, so I'm sorry. I can't find my chat. So, I think my screen updated and it did something weird with it. Anyways, I would echo what Ken just said, but I also, he was talking about curricular updates, and I think that is essential. But I also will echo that even though our budget situation is unknown, the past couple of years, there has been a lot of discussion just about having a discussion with the school committee at some point, whether you call it a retreat or something else, about overall priorities, rather than waiting until we receive your budget that's ready to go to the state or the towns, but in the development process, in hearing what we're choosing to pursue and what we're choosing to not, and hearing what we would need ideally and what we're choosing to cut out. I've heard every year I've been on the committee and a couple of years before that there really haven't been those kinds of discussions, and I've heard a call for those. So I would, in addition to the curricular piece, which is important and related, I think in my mind it probably goes beyond that, and it may be the same discussion, but I think just a general discussion, and I know we're having to look at our strategic plan as well, so it may tie into wherever that goes, but I think a need to just have that discussion is really important, not just for curricular reasons, but also just general priorities. I mean, and I won't go into speculating what those are, but they've come up a lot, whether it's staffing or, other or programmatic decisions. There's just a lot of pieces that I recall the past couple of years, people have said, oh, I really wish we had some transparency around how these decisions are made about what things make it into the budget and what things don't. So I would urge that to be beyond the specific curricular pieces that we've found this year.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on 2022 budget? Hearing none, we'll go to transportation settlement update.
Just a quick comment, Mike. As the committee knows, this has been referred to Legal Affairs Subcommittee. We did meet with Attorney Batulis last Tuesday in executive session, and that process is ongoing.
Any questions on transportation settlement update? Hearing none, we'll talk about enrollment trends for this year.
So this is a response to our previous meeting, and as the committee knows, I had worked with Superintendent McCall on a statement relative to the public comment for MLC. That is that statement, detailed statement, was included in the packet. It was also posted on the DESE website under public comments relative to MLC. There are, as I stated earlier in our meeting here tonight, there are still so many unknowns relative to the FY22 state budget, least of which is the implementation of the SOA. Again, it's been pushed back a year, and we can only hope that that gets implemented in FY22. As we wrote and as we've discussed, we will be held harmless, if you will, in terms of with the reduction of our student enrollment. It's certainly a long way to go in terms of the finalizing the 22 budget and in terms of the changes that may or may not be made to MLC. I guess time will tell, as to where this all shakes out relative to 22. I do encourage folks to look at what was written, and again, as more information becomes available. I mean, there was an update yesterday provided by the DESE that there was an afternoon session. I was unavailable to attend a virtual session looking at foundation enrollments for 22, and I will be reporting on that to the committee at our next meeting.
Any question on enrollment trends?
I don't specifically, because I think we're waiting a lot on what you just discussed. So I'm glad to hear DESE's talking about it. I guess I would caution, because I keep hearing you mention that a lot of it depends on the SOA implementation. And my recollection from that was that, I mean, there are changes in the transportation reimbursement, but my recollection was that we really weren't getting an excessive amount of funds from that. We were only getting something like $400,000 or something like that. And that they have a specific purpose because there was a plan. And in our case, most of it is for students with disabilities rather than the general budget. So I guess when I hear that we're depending on those funds, my interpretation might be wrong, but that was my recollection, that it was a relatively small amount of funds. And the transportation obviously is more, and that's very relevant. But in any amount of funds is relevant. But compared to our overall budget, I guess I just want to clarify, is that correct or not? Because the SOA is important, but that's a relatively small amount compared to our, $98 million somewhat budget. So
you're correct, Malaya. And that's the reason for the difference between the governor's House 1 budget from last January and the budget that was released about 2 weeks ago on October 14th. The reduction of approximately $408,000 is in essence backing out of Chapter 70 what would have been the SOA portion of Chapter 70 for FY21. That is correct. And again, in terms of circuit breaker, the intent was to roll it out over the course of several years with about 25% in year one, which would have been 21, and now that's been pushed back to 22. But yes, and SOA is not the be all end all. The SOA, I think, actually is targeted more so for the urban districts than other suburban communities.
It is funding, and obviously it would be helpful if it would come to fruition, but I just wanted to make sure I was not misunderstanding that. So
That's
thank you.
correct. That's the correct figure.
Any other questions on enrollment trend? Seeing none, I guess my one question, and this is probably, Dan, more to Daryl than to you. I know that we've asked for it a couple times, but I think, at least at this committee and also at school committee, we've been looking for a refresh of that table that Director Keenan had been providing, probably now 2 months ago, which had different categories of students who have left over the past few years. I guess my question is, when can we expect that table to be refreshed with current numbers?
That should be refreshed for my report this week.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Is there anything, Dan, on your policy review tonight?
No, Mike, we're all set. This was the bidding policy that was discussed at our previous meeting, brought forward to the school committee, the full committee. So as I wrote right now, I'm just in the process of making the changes, the procurement threshold changes that'll go into the financial procedural manual, which we're working on.
Okay. The next item is annual evaluation of Director of Business and Finance. Everyone, all the members of this committee should have received, I believe you did receive, and most of you have responded with a questionnaire that the response of which will go to Superintendent McCall for feedback. I think you have everyone's response but mine, and mine should be coming shortly. So I think we're looking like we're in pretty good shape with that. Next item is approval of minutes. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of October 5th, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
And Rebecca, do you mind any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none. Rebecca, do you mind calling the vote?
Yep. Dennis,
Dennis, yes.
Utmar,
Omar, yes.
Mills,
Mills, yes.
Gustafson,
Gustafson, yes.
unanimous.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, next item, deliverables from October 5th meeting. I believe we discussed those in context with the rest of the agenda. Dan, is there anything that I'm missing that we need to discuss?
Nope, we're pretty much we've covered it all.
Super. Next meeting on the agenda, next item on the agenda is our next meeting. We'll try to sync up with our pattern of meeting approximately a week before our full school committee meeting. If there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
And Rebecca, do you mind calling the vote?
Whoop. Sorry, Dennis,
Dennis, yes.
Utmar,
Omar, yes.
Mills,
Mills, yes.
Gustafson.
Gustafson, yes.
All set.
Super. Thank you so much, everyone. We are adjourned. Have a great night. And if you haven't, go vote. Or not. Go vote. Good night.
Good night.